Okay, so we're going to go look at the code in a little bit more detail. You can see that what's going on is we're going to open the actual class called picture, and it's referencing the scatter class, which is a Kivy class. You can look at their library in more detail to look at what that means. So here you can just click on it to look at what scatter has. It's basically a type of widget that allows you to create sort of specific properties and background information that can be used in creating the actual application. So what Kivy does is basically give you a lot of background kinds of code that allow you to create the framework, the tools, the buttons, the load, the kind of sort of frame, if you will, as well as data that allow you to then create a fairly sophisticated app without too much code. Granted, this is a fairly simple app, but you can actually do a lot more with just a little bit more code. So here you see that we're going to be using this method build, and that's all we need to use actually. So we're going to be referencing the scatter class, which is a Kivy library class. And then we're also going to be using app, which is another important Kivy class. And app is the main class, which allows you to then, of course, create and run the app. So you can see that there's a number of methods there. Again, a fairly large class, just like the scatter one. But most of what we need to utilize is already run in there or is already in there. And you can see the run method as well, which is what will be used when we're actually running this app. So you can see that the app will be run using that method. Okay, so when that run method is called, it will then eventually call the build, which will allow us to create the app and load the images. So what's simply going to happen is that we're going to get the root. The root is created in the file called pictures.kv. So pictures.kv is the other important information here. So there's two things that are really important. It's the main.py, which is the standard Python module that Kivy will look for, which is where it assumes the code for the app resides, but also the KV file. So the KV file is Kivy's own domain-specific language, DSL, that is used to create things like the framework itself, the layout. It allows you to essentially load a number of parameters that tell the app what it's going to look like, the look and feel, if you will, of that app. So you can see, for instance, it has what's called the float layout. It gives it the canvas information, the coloring, tells it the shape. It also applies a box layout within the float layout, so that's kind of referencing where different parts of the layout will be aligned. You can find a lot of detail about this in the Kivy language sites within kivy.org. So here it gives you information about, for instance, different kinds of layouts, the canvas styles, and also give you information about what specific information might want to add to the widgets. So the kind of arguments of inputs, the buttons you might want to add, what kind of conditional statements, for instance, you might want to have that allow different functionality to be expressed. So you can do some good amount of information in this. Essentially, it allows you to not have to put that much code into your class or into your Python module, and let the .kv file to do much of that by providing the background information that allows it to create the framework in which your app will reside in. So that's what the Kivy language essentially does, and that's all given in this main page. If you look at the API Kivy language .html page within kivy.org, you'll see that a lot of information is located there in terms of the functionality that allows us to give rules to the widgets and creating them in our classes. Okay, so that is done there, and you can see also we can give rules, things like the pictures themselves, the images, the size of the pictures, the canvas in which they'll be displayed, as well as the borders and the kinds of things. You can see it's referencing other image files for the border image, for instance. So there's something called shadow 32, and if you open that, you can see it's just simply a shadow, a border kind of image that can be used as background for the main images. Okay, so that's all that information says. So then all that background information can be put into that KV file. So all we have to do is worry about the actual loading of the pictures and then just running the actual and creating the app itself and adding the information to the widget that we create. Okay, so we're going to be basically referencing the main app, and then loading pictures to it, creating it, and then letting it open. So that's all we have to do. You can see in relatively few lines of code, we can do all that and then have the actual app appear. So that's pretty much it. There's another thing that is often used, which are the blacklist and whitelist. So you can see we have nothing in there for our purposes, but it can be important for some kinds of applications. The reason is that you might want to blacklist some parts of the code that you don't want to use, or aspects of certain parts of the load files. So the reason why you might want to do that, for instance, is that certain deployments to certain operating systems may require you not to have certain widgets or certain parts of your code. And so the blacklist allows you to do that. And the whitelist is sort of the reverse of that. Things that you want to generally include. Since we want to include everything, we can just by default leave it empty. But it is an option where you can have, which will be looked for in the deployment creation phase. The Android.txt is information specifically for Android deployment. So it needs to know the title of the actual project or the app, which will be pictures, an author, and an orientation of the app. So that's all it needs to know for Android specific deployment. So that's given here in case we want to then create this for Androids. Okay, so those are the main sort of back information that we need. And then the rest is just the Python, and that's pretty much it. So once we've run this, as I already ran it, you can see that it creates the app. So the next part is now to look at how do we actually create a deployment. And like I said before, we're going to be focusing more on Windows, or for Mac OS X today.